It's 11:14 on a Sunday night and you're lying in bed doing the math again. Not because anything went wrong. Nothing went wrong. You're just lying there in the dark running the same numbers you ran last Sunday and the Sunday before that. Mortgage, car payment, student loan, groceries, trying to figure out if this is the month you finally get ahead or if you're just going to tread water again like you have been for 3 years. You know the answer. You've known the answer. But you keep running the math anyway, because the alternative is accepting that this is just what life feels like now. Meanwhile, your neighbor, same street, bought around the same time, similar house, not some wildly different income, woke up last Tuesday and decided to take the week off. No crisis, no email to his manager. He just didn't feel like going in, so he didn't. And here's the thing, he's not richer than you. He's just not doing that math anymore. My name is Dave, and I spend way too much time thinking about why two people with almost identical situations can end up living completely different lives. If you're someone who has a mortgage, is thinking about getting one, or is already years deep and wondering what the finish line actually looks like, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps clarify what you're actually working toward. Today we're going to talk about something the personal finance world wildly underexplains. What actually happens to your money, your career, your brain, and your actual life the moment you make that last mortgage payment? And I promise by the end of this, that Sunday night math problem is going to look very different. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you, when you're 12 years deep into a 30-year mortgage, you don't just lose a bill when it's paid off. You lose a prison sentence you'd stopped noticing you were serving. Let's start with the numbers, because the math here is more brutal than most people realize. In both directions, the average monthly mortgage payment in 2025 hit $2,329. And that's just principal and interest, nothing else. For someone who bought or refinanced at current rates, $2,845 is closer to reality. Now, the median American household takes home around $5,400 a month after taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, which means on a median income, a standard mortgage payment is consuming 43% of your disposable income before you've bought a single grocery or made a single car payment. 43%. The threshold every financial professional on earth agrees on is 28%. So most people with a mortgage are walking around 15 percentage points over the limit every month for 30 years. Congratulations, you are technically a functioning adult who has also agreed to be financially strangled in slow motion until you're 63. Here's what that actually looks like. Meet the Garcias. Dual income, combined $110,000 a year, which sounds solid until you run it through what life actually costs. After federal taxes, state taxes, FICA, and a modest 401k contribution, they're taking home around $6,800 a month. Now let's watch it disappear. Mortgage on their $380,000 house, $2,400. Property taxes, $380. Homeowner's insurance, $200. Maintenance reserve because the HVAC doesn't care that it's December, $320. That's $3,300 a month just to legally occupy the building. They've got $3,500 left. Two car payments because they both commute, $800. Car insurance, $240. Gas, because nothing is walkable in their suburb, $280. Student loans, because those degrees didn't pay for themselves, $550. Health insurance premiums, their employer only partially covers, $380. Groceries for two people attempting to eat like adults, $700. Utilities, electricity, gas, water, internet, phones, $420. We're at $130 remaining. And we haven't touched clothing, the kids' activities, the $80 copay from last month's urgent care visit, the dog who just started limping, any savings, any retirement beyond that modest 401k, or any concept of fun. The Garcias are not irresponsible. They don't have a boat. They've never been to Europe. They are two professional adults who did everything they were supposed to do. And every single financial decision they make, every career conversation, every request for flexibility, every time one of them thinks about going back to school or starting something on the side, gets filtered through one silent question. Can we still cover the mortgage? That question is running in the background of their lives like a tab they can never close. And here's what most people don't realize. That tab disappears the day the mortgage is paid off. And when it does, something the Garcias can barely imagine right now happens. They start making completely different decisions. More on them in a bit. Let's talk about what actually frees up when the mortgage is gone. Because people consistently get this wrong in both directions. Either they underestimate the impact, or they overestimate the cash they'll suddenly have. When the mortgage payment disappears, you don't suddenly have the full amount to invest. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance still exist. For a $400,000 home, you're looking at roughly $838 a month in ongoing costs with no mortgage. So if your payment was $2,845, you've freed up around $2,000 a month in real deployable money. Not $2,845, about $2,000, which is still, and I want to be precise here, absolutely insane in terms of what it does over time. If you take that $2,000 and put it into a basic S&P 500 index fund earning the historical average of around 8% annually, here's what happens. In 5 years, $146,000. In 10 years, $365,000. In 15 years, $693,000. In 20 years, $1,177,000. Think about that. You contributed $480,000 of your own money over those 20 years. The market contributed $697,000 on top of that, more than you put in yourself. The majority of your eventual wealth came from compound interest, not from working harder. This is the part of the mortgage payoff story nobody tells you in the bank's office when you're signing the 30-year paperwork. They're not going to mention that their product is keeping you from $1.1 million, funnily enough. And the crazy part is, before I keep going, I need to address the argument that a certain type of person is already drafting right now. That argument goes, if your mortgage rate is below 5%, you're mathematically better off investing the extra money than prepaying principal. And look, that argument is not wrong. Let me give it the real version. Research on a $500,000 mortgage at 3% found that investing excess payments in the stock market outperformed early payoff in roughly 95% of historical 30-year windows. The logic is clean. A guaranteed 3% return from killing debt loses to a historical 8% return from equities. About 82% of existing mortgage holders have rates below 5% right now. So if that's you, the spreadsheet says invest the difference. Here's what the spreadsheet doesn't know. It assumes you actually invest the difference. Most people don't. They spend it. The mortgage payment was forced savings. When it disappears and gets replaced by discretionary cash, a terrifying percentage of households absorb it into lifestyle creep within 18 months and have nothing to show for it. The spreadsheet also assumes you have the psychological fortitude to watch your investment portfolio drop 40% in a market crash while you still owe $2,500 a month in mandatory payments on the house, which is a fundamentally different experience than watching the same portfolio drop 40% from a house you own outright and can stay in regardless. One scenario is uncomfortable. The other is the reason people make catastrophic financial decisions under pressure. And here's the thing the invest the difference crowd never mentions. You've been making every financial decision of your adult life while carrying this debt. Research shows that debt impairs cognitive functioning in measurable ways. You have literally been making the should I pay off the mortgage or invest decision from a cognitively compromised state. So maybe weigh your own math accordingly. At mortgage rates above 7%, which is most people who bought since 2022, aggressive payoff becomes a very competitive guaranteed return that's hard to argue against. Between 4.5% and 7%, it's a genuine judgment call. Below 4.5%, invest the difference, but only if you'll actually invest it and not let it quietly become better takeout habits. The real answer, as usual, isn't a rate. It's knowing yourself. Let me go back to the psychology, because there's something here that the personal finance world breezes past and really shouldn't. A 2019 study tracked what happened to people when their debts were eliminated, not reduced, eliminated. Anxiety dropped, not a little, but from 78% of participants showing clinical symptoms down to 53%. That's a 25 percentage point reduction in diagnosable anxiety just from closing debt accounts. People made better decisions, not felt better about their decisions, but actually performed better on cognitive assessments. They became measurably less impulsive, less likely to grab the short-term reward at the expense of the long-term outcome. But here's the finding that stopped me cold. The number of debt accounts closed mattered more than the dollar amount of relief. Closing a $3,000 credit card produced more psychological improvement than getting a $5,000 debt partially reduced. The brain doesn't care about the dollar amount. It cares about the open tab. And for most people who fought their way through credit cards, car payments, and student loans, the mortgage is the last open tab, the last thing humming in the background. When it closes, the refrigerator you'd stopped hearing finally goes quiet. Separate research found that carrying high debt-to-asset ratios correlates with measurably higher blood pressure, higher rates of depression, and worse self-reported health, even after controlling for income levels. This is not a metaphor. The mortgage is not just a financial obligation. It is a physiological one. Your body has been carrying it, and when it's gone, your body notices. All right, real talk. Are you running the Sunday night math right now? What does your number look like? Drop it in the comments, whether you're drowning, surviving, or finally getting ahead. I'm genuinely curious where people are at. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part I think about most. When the Garcia's mortgage disappears, let's say they aggressively paid it off at year 22 instead of year 30, which is absolutely achievable. Their monthly expense floor drops by $2,000. In FIRE math, which is just the formula that says you need 25 times your annual expenses to be financially independent, eliminating $24,000 a year in mandatory costs reduces their financial independence number by $600,000. They haven't earned more money, they haven't gotten a promotion or launched a business, they've just changed what survival costs. And that number determines everything. When your monthly survival requires both incomes running at full capacity, neither person can afford to leave a job they hate, take a pay cut to do something meaningful, start a business that needs 18 months to get profitable, ask for a schedule that doesn't wreck their health, or do anything that might threaten the income that feeds the mortgage. You are financially indentured, not because you're weak, but because the math requires it. The mortgage is a 30-year employment contract you signed without fully realizing it. Research published in 2020 found that improved housing security led to significant increases in business formation, particularly among women and non-white entrepreneurs who are disproportionately affected by financial exposure. A separate study found that carrying a mortgage significantly reduces entrepreneurship, with the effect strongest when loan-to-value ratios are highest. The mechanism is exactly what you'd expect. Every dollar trapped in a mandatory monthly payment is a dollar that can't absorb risk elsewhere. So what does the Garcia's life look like at year 22? Mortgage gone? Mrs. Garcia stops running every career conversation through the question of whether this job is stable enough to cover the payment. She takes the role with more meaning and slightly less salary, because they can afford the difference now. Mr. Garcia starts the contracting business he's been talking about since 2021, because one bad quarter no longer means they lose the house. They're not rich. Their income didn't change, but their decisions changed completely, because the math changed completely. Now, a brief moment of honesty, because I promised you the real numbers and not the fantasy version. The house isn't actually free once the mortgage is paid off. I know you were hoping I'd let you have that one. But the property taxes aren't going anywhere. They've gone up 27% nationally since 2019. If you're in New Jersey, you're paying $743 a month on a median home, mortgage or not. Your house is basically paying rent to the state regardless of whether you owe a bank. Homeowners insurance has jumped 52% since 2020. And the 1% annual maintenance rule, budgeting 1% of your home's value per year for repairs, still applies. On a $400,000 home, that's $333 a month set aside for the water heater that will pick 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve to announce its retirement. Add it up and your paid-off home still costs roughly $838 a month nationally to own, closer to $1,300 in high-tax states. So the $2,845 payment disappearing doesn't hand you $2,845 to invest. It hands you roughly $2,000 in new freedom. But plan for the real number. Because the gap between I thought I'd have $2,845 and I actually have $2,000 is exactly the size of a November property tax bill that will genuinely ruin your week if you weren't expecting it. Let's talk about who actually gets here, because the demographics tell a story worth sitting with. About 40% of U.S. owner-occupied homes are now mortgage-free, an all-time high. Sounds encouraging. Then you look at who those people are. 63% of homeowners 65 and older are mortgage-free versus fewer than 28% of working-age homeowners. The average age of payoff is 58 to 63. Meanwhile, the median first-time homebuyer age just hit 36. A 30-year mortgage from 36 doesn't end until 66, 3 years into what used to be called retirement. And here's the number that genuinely unsettles me. In 1989, 3% of homeowners over 80 still had a mortgage. Today, nearly a third do. The share of 65 to 79-year-olds still carrying mortgages has gone from 24% to 41% in 30 years. Median mortgage debt among seniors is up 400%. We are dragging housing debt into retirement at a scale that has never happened before in American history. And we're doing it quietly, like it's normal, like it's fine. It is not fine. Only 23% of all Americans are completely debt-free. No mortgage, no car payment, nothing. Which means what we're talking about today is genuinely rare. Rare enough that when people cross that finish line, they consistently report something they couldn't have predicted. It's not just relief, it's a kind of silence they didn't know was missing. Sound familiar? That refrigerator hum you stopped hearing? That's the mortgage. And you won't know how loud it was until the day it stops. So how do you actually accelerate this? Because the math on getting there 5 or 8 years early is more compelling than most people run. On a $450,000 mortgage at 6.5%, your standard payment is $200 and $844 a month. Total interest over 30 years, $573,840. You pay more in interest than the house initially cost. Sit with that. The bank is going to collect more from you in interest alone than the entire value of the home you bought. It's a beautiful business model. If you're the bank, think about it this way. Bi-weekly payments. Cutting your monthly payment in half and paying every 2 weeks sounds like accounting trivia until you realize it results in 13 full payments per year instead of 12. That one change, which costs you nothing in lifestyle, cuts 5 to 6 years off the loan and eliminates over $119,000 in interest. One extra payment per year. $119,000 gone. Throwing an extra $500 a month at principal shortens the timeline by about 8 years and kills $150,000 in interest. An extra $1,000 a month nearly halves the loan term to 17 years. None of these are heroic sacrifices. They're the difference between paying off your house at 55 versus 63, and the life you get to live at 55 with no mortgage, versus the one you're living at 63 waiting for it to end, based on everything we've covered, is not a small difference. Here's the kicker. Let's land this properly. What do you actually do on the day the last payment processes? First, verify that your lender filed the lien release and that you receive your deed. This is the most boring sentence in the video and also the most important one to remember. Because lenders occasionally just don't file it, and you find out 3 years later when you try to sell the house and discover you don't legally own what you've been paying for. I file this under things that are both tedious and essential, which describes most of adult life. Second, before you redirect a single dollar, rebuild your emergency fund. You've been house poor for years. Your reserves are almost certainly thinner than they should be. Get 6 to 12 months of your new lower expenses in liquid savings before you do anything ambitious. Then, deploy the former payment in order. Max the 401k match first, because that's a 50 to 100% guaranteed return and nothing else on this list comes close. Max the Roth IRA, $7,000 a year in 2025, grows completely tax-free. The IRS never touches the gains. Max the 401k contribution limit, $23,500. Fund an HSA if you're eligible, then pour everything remaining into a taxable brokerage account with low-cost index funds. If you're redirecting $2,000 a month through all of these at 8%, you're at $365,000 in a decade and $1.117 million 20 years. Not because you did anything clever, because you survived the mortgage, closed the last tab, and finally gave compound interest the room it needed to do what it was always going to do. If you'd just gotten the bank out of the way, here's what I actually want you to take from this. The mortgage wasn't just a large bill. It was actually, let me put it this way. It was a permission slip you had to silently ask for every time you wanted to do something different with your life. Want to leave a job you hate? Better check if you can still cover the mortgage. Want to start something risky? Better make sure the mortgage is safe first. Want to take a pay cut to do work that matters? You can't. The mortgage, for most people, for most of their adult lives, the mortgage is the invisible hand that shapes nearly every major decision they make. Not the only hand, but the one with the tightest grip. When it's gone, the grip releases. That's what the Garcias discover at year 22. That's what every person who gets there reports. Not that they're suddenly wealthy, though the compounding takes care of that in time, but that they can finally make decisions based on what they actually want, rather than what the mortgage requires. That's the change nobody talks about. That's the one that matters most. So that Sunday night math you've been running in the dark, you're not going to run it forever. But the people who get to stop running it the earliest aren't the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who understood what the finish line was actually worth and ran toward it on purpose. If this changed how you think about your mortgage, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it.